I call it microwave culture of people. People, they'll text me. I've got family that'll text me in language, and they translate it. Then they, "Uncle, is this the right thing? You know, is this right?" And I'll just text them back, say, "Come and have a cup of tea." Because the way that I was taught was we walked the bush with our fathers, our grandfathers, hunting and all that. We did things, and so that it proved and showed you that culture is alive. And
is that something you felt was missing? Is that why you?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, living and working in the city, even though all this city is our traditional lands, and our old people stood here at you know, the days of invasion, colonisation, settlement of the establishment of the Swan River Colony back in 1829 here, which is only roughly 190 years ago. So it's not that long at all when you think about it. So we wanted to leave something and have an opportunity for kids, because they're so involved with the Western style of living, they're forgetting their culture. So there's that other threat that's coming. So we want this to be an opportunity. Kids can start learning language, sitting with us on location, coming on a tour, getting to like that, know it, and then also be part of other things that we want to provide.
Is it just limited to people, the younger generation in the city, or the culture really is under threat? People, the younger kids, they no longer know the language, they hardly know anything about.
I think that, you know, there is that time, but I think it's changing. I think kids and people are wanting to know the culture, and not just only Aboriginal kids and wanting their own culture. It's non-Aboriginal people too as well, you know, and other cultural groups wanting to learn. And I think it's one of those things that our culture is good at, is sharing, and that sharing is part of going through a process of trust, getting to know people, and how far people can, you know, come through, and how much you can really teach people.
I think there's a belief that Australia as a country doesn't have culture. Well, actually, in fact, Australia as a country has the oldest culture on the planet, which is the Indigenous culture.
Yeah.
Right? And there is evidence to prove that Indigenous people were probably one of the first that walked the earth. And so, you know, that's really, really significant. And there's been some loss of that culture through colonisation, and also through early colonisation trying to maybe take native Indigenous people away from their culture and westernise them.
Right.
So it's been a whole reverse.
The lost generation.
But
Yeah, I'm going past
did you
that.
grow up in a traditional way, or did you grow up in the city?
No, I didn't grow up in the city. Our families were pushed out of this area, and so they ended up, and I grew up about 200 kilometres east of Perth. So out sort of farming country, and living on we mainly grew up on farms before we moved into town. My father worked for the farmers.
But were you exposed to the way of life?
Yeah. My first language is Nyunga, is my father's language, mother's language, and then I learned English after. So we learned as much as we could, I suppose, from the time and our way. We lived with the old people, so we were exposed to those times when today hardly any of that happens really. Like sitting around a campfire, having a conversation in language, and hearing the old people talk. You don't hear too many people talk the old language anymore.
Has there been any efforts to revive any of that back?
Yeah,
especially at least in the city.
Yeah, there are efforts, and you know, even some of the corporates here, they've been engaging us to translate words for them. So I've what they're wanting is, so they build a new building and they're wanting names. So they want to also show that they are you know, supporting, encouraging community to know Aboriginal names, words, the meanings of those. So a number of these buildings here in government, non-government, Big corporates, they have their office. One company in particular, they engaged me. They wanted 50 words translated, or locations. Do you know the names of these locations? So we basically set up a little contract, and I translated all those locations words into the first language, and then they use those words to name all their buildings, rooms on their 2 or 3 floors, just over here in one of the buildings. Yeah.
And I think, for government, there's also a swing to going back to using Indigenous names, such as Naqiuddin Bridge that we saw today, honouring Naqiuddin by naming the new Naqiuddin Square after.
You have lots of festivals or events year round.
Yeah. See, when you think about things and you go back, there was a time when Perth was a prohibited area during the 1920s to the 1960s. Aboriginal people, you could work in the city, but at about 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon you had to be out of the CBD. So there were also, there were policies where Aboriginal people weren't allowed to speak their language anymore. Culture wasn't allowed to be celebrated. So it's and to know that was part of history to where things are today. You're able to celebrate culture and speak the language now. But one of the sad things too about it is that some people have lost that opportunity, and they feel even more worse. So when I sit down so one of the things we do is like a welcome to country. I'll speak in my language, my father's language, and I'll welcome you to my country. And only a traditional owner can do that. And then in traditional times when people were welcome to country and they came visiting you, like people come to your homes today, they'll knock on the door and ring the bell and they'll wait. So in traditional times people would come and make a little fire and wait. So that's like knocking on the door, ringing the bell. And so you wait there. And if you were to go past that point and you didn't wait, you were seen as a person of concern, and the traditional owners will find you, they'll spear you and kill you before the sun went down, because you broke the law. It's like today, people coming, they don't ring your bell and knock on your door, they just walk in, or they go this way, go that way, and so you call the police. Some people call them Ghostbusters, but yeah.
How big is the community? Community here?
I think the last time, roughly the ABS census, I think it was about 35,000 Aboriginal people living in the city. That gives you a round figure, really, of Aboriginal people. That can be any tribal clan or any tribal members living in the city.
How many
from other tribes. So you may be a Yamaji, it's another tribal nation north of us. So you could be from another tribe altogether. So I think in Australia they say there was roughly over 500 Aboriginal languages. So 500, you could say 500 Aboriginal nations, separate nations, different languages.
To the 35,000, what percentage would you say of the population of Perth does that make? Is it like 5 or 6%?
Yeah,
are Indigenous?
I believe it is about 2 or 3%, something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Do you feel the culture, at least even the language, from this 35,000 people, at least in the city?
Yep.
How many people do you think are fluent in that old language? How many do you think know the way of life how it was back then? How many know how to play with a boomerang?
Yeah. There'd be of that 35,000 there, you might say less than 10%, maybe 5% of people.
How does that make you? And I assume that would be your generation.
Yeah.
And how does that?
Even the younger generation, the next generation down, they're actually starting to get more involved with culture. There's conversations about people starting to make artefacts again. So it's this reigniting of culture and practices, ways. People are sharing. People also intermarrying across tribes and so forth. There was a time when you would you married within your tribe, but there was that skin system that was set up within your tribe, and the skin system showed you who you could marry, who you could not marry.
It's like an arranged.
Everything was arranged, and you also give away, but you also traded. So society was very well structured. There were laws, there were educations, there were no unemployment. Everyone had a job. You know, there was no one homeless. Everyone had a home to go to. So when you did get welcomed into country by a traditional owner, they would go through that ceremony, welcome you in, and then they would then also tell you that you're part of this family group here. Then that family group there, or that skin group there, they will tell you the do's and don'ts. You can do all this, but you can't do this. Then you learn the way. So then you fit in with the other skin groups, and you all work together in harmony. Once you start breaking the laws and rules, you get told, you get warned, and then you get belted if you don't pull your head in. So there's a good discipline, you know.
And there's a very different set of rules between Western law
Yes.
and Indigenous law.
Yes.
And I think that's been in the news a lot recently. There was some instances up in Kalgoorlie where a young boy was killed,
Yes.
and there was some fighting afterwards. And a lot of people would suggest that maybe if we left Indigenous people to deal with Indigenous issues in the Indigenous way, it'd be better. What do you think, Walter?
Well, I think it's an interesting system we have today, in that, you know, before time itself began, Aboriginal law has always been here. Indigenous law has always been here. And since Western laws come in, and like we say, there's that conflict, that struggle, and through the colonisation settlement, there's been all those massacres and frontier conflicts, you know, and murders here and there from both sides and so on, and that struggle for power, and to where it is today. In some parts of Australia, you've got Western law and Aboriginal law. So, for example, if an Aboriginal man was, you know, murdered another person in their community, they would then face Western law. And in some parts of Australia, they also have to face Aboriginal law too. So there's two laws they've got to face. And so what happens is that, and in traditional times, old people the victim's family would speak with the offending families, you know, the person who did the offence. So they,
Direct, isn't it?
yeah. So they would decide what is the right punishment. Okay, and then when that came to right, it was good. So what happens today is that people then, once they're accused of a crime, and such as those sort of things, crimes, they go to jail. They go to a Western jail, serve the time, and then when they finish, then they come out. And then that's, come here. Aboriginal law now kicks in. As soon as you walk out of the Western jail, Aboriginal law kicks in. Come back to the community. Because of that crime, this is the punishment now.
So you get punished twice.
Well, Aboriginal law, they say, you go there, you have a feed, you get a warm bed, 3 feeds a day.
Yeah.
It's like going to a hotel. Come here now, you face the real law. This is the real law.
They got a point.
Aboriginal law.
Yeah.
And so they get a point.
Yeah.
They have a good point, and they get the point. In
Yeah.
other words, it can be a spear.
Right.
Any part of your body. And that, once again, is agreed by the families. And the person then who carries it out, they got to make sure it's done right.
Walter, about your tours,
Yes.
what surprises people most about them after they're done with their 90 minutes?
I think a lot of people are surprised by the fact that you know, there were laws, Australian laws, that prevented Aboriginal people practicing their culture, and they were surprised today that Aboriginal people, you know, the amount of murders and massacres that took place. They're surprised that Aboriginal people can sit down like I do, and others who are in the tourism industry, and other people can also sit down and talk, but you know, there's this hurt, there's this harm that's within you. But you got to tell the story, because you don't want it to die. You don't want it to go away or be forgotten. You know. Yeah, but it's about culture. It's about knowing, and you know, I mean, working with Mother Nature. It's like, you know, keeping that relationship sense alive. You know. And I suppose just based on that point here in Noongar country, we have 6 seasons. You know, a lot of people only know the 4 seasons. You know, the band, but also, you know, they just know summer, autumn, winter, and spring. But when we do our tours, we talk about the 6 Noongar seasons. So in our country, we have 6 seasons here in Noongar, and then if you go to any other tribal nation, they might have 4 seasons. You know, which is theirs, or 8 seasons, depending on if you're in the tropics, the desert, or way down in the south. So yeah, they're surprised by knowing that you know, there's this knowledge that people are really wanting to know, and the young kids today at school are learning a lot more than what their parents or their grandparents have ever learnt about Aboriginal people, and which is a sad thing, because some of my old schoolmates say, they have sons that go to primary school now, and they said, Walter, we didn't know anything about this. Our boys know more about Aboriginal culture and your culture than we did. I said, well, when we went to school, they never taught us that. They taught us, you know, about the Spanish. They taught us about Christopher Columbus and Sir Francis Drake and all those, you know, sailors and discoverers, you know.
But it's on its way to its revival, isn't it, the culture?
Sorry,
But it's on a way to its, other than the law.
Yeah.
At least the culture, the language,
Yes.
it's on its way to its revival, where
Yeah,
everyone's
it is, yeah.
getting exposed.
And like I say, other people are learning. I've got a good friend, non-Aboriginal friend of mine, and he can't get enough. He talks language, you know, and he's got a book. He went and got himself a book. I said, go and get these books, and then when I've seen him a number of times, he starts talking to me in my language, and I look at him, hey, and then I start talking to him. So we start having a conversation, a little conversation.
Is it okay for Wadjalas to speak
Yep.
your language?
I think it's okay. Because I mean, it's one of those things that if things were done right, everyone would be in Noongar here. They'd be known. They'd be all in a skin system. They'll all be working and very close to traditional ways of life here with the first people. We wouldn't have English names, like I say. People say, "What's your name?" Walter McCguire. You know, that's not really that's not my Aboriginal name. That was McGuire was a name given to my great grandfather. So once again, everything was changing. So a lot of Aboriginal people today have like English, Scottish, European names. You know, and further north you get Aboriginal families up there with Asian names. You know, so yeah. So and it's that Asian influences. You know. Yarnba, kaya nuna kayaki nicha ngalaka buja wajak nyunga bivman. Kura ngalaka demon ga mamman ga ngan marmanin man balabanini nicha. Galgunga buri yaki nicha buja. Bal jenning in wat bala yo akol nicha galaka bilya double yerigan. Kwap. Kan jenning in nuna ka mam and konja kujo nicha ya kujo. Kwap nuna ka yini nicha ngalaka buja wajak nyunga. Kujo bangak bangarbrek warbre nuna ka court where nuna ka jena dabakan kuli nicha ngalaka buja. Kujo bangak bangarbrek warbre nuna ka karlapur. Nuna ka mort bodo nuna wot koranya da jenning in balapa. Nuna ka wangin kwap nyunga kargan. Yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, it's good to see you here today. This is the land of the Noongar Whadjuk people. We are the first people of this land. We have been here before time itself began. Our old people teach us we are the first, and that all the cultures of the world came from us, and they have come back to us. So it's good to see you all back here, and let us come together and enjoy life. We also ask that the Great Spirit bless you and keep you safe, bless your families and loved ones, that when you return, you can talk about the Noongar people, the first people, and how we welcomed you here to our country, and the blessings we give to you as you leave and you go back and tell those good stories. So so I'd like to sing you a song from a place we call Kakardap, also known as Kings Park. And this song is a very old song, but it's about the trapdoor spider. So it may be a blessing for you on your journeys here in our country, and that when you return, bring back the goodness and the blessings so we all can be standing together on country. Wanare gamelana, wanare gamelana, boyangodo, wanango, boyangodo, wanango, wanare gamelana, boyangodo, wanango, wanare gamelana, wanare gamelana, boyangodo, wanango, boyangodo, wanango, wanare gamelana. Hey! Nunu kadaba kan kule ne kengal ka puja. Take care as you walk upon the lands of the Nyunga Wajak people. Ngalaka jening and nunu ka budawun. Kwap ngalaka wangi. So I'll see you later. We'll have a good conversation.